Hello there. Welcome to Brady's Corner. I'm Brady. This is my corner. Today we have a very special guest, Elise Boggs-Morales. Elise, thank you so much for joining us today. Please introduce yourself to us and our illustrious audience.
Hi, everybody. Brady, thank you for having me. I am Elise Boggs-Morales, as you mentioned, founder of Elise Boggs Consulting, which focuses on leadership and team development. And I can unpack that a little bit more. But basically, I'm helping leaders maximize their influence so they can get the results that they want.
Well, I appreciate that. Could you drill down a little bit? Who do you typically work with, and tell us about how you got started doing this.
So my sweet spot is leaders. So leaders at kind of the executive level and maybe a level down from that. And I focus on leaders because a lot of leaders make it in their profession to the place that they have gotten to at that level because they're really good at their job. But rarely are leadership skills taught. There's kind of like a missing link there. You don't learn it in school. You don't necessarily learn it as part of your training. And so really smart people who are really good at what they do start to feel that sense of failure with their teams, and they don't understand why there's not a connection there. Why am I losing people? Why are they not performing at high levels? Why am I losing good talent? Why can't I seem to get people engaged and motivated? Is this younger generation just hard to manage? I've heard it all. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact of, just skills aren't really taught on how to be a good leader, and it's a totally different skill set. So that kind of is a perfect segue to talk about how did I get into it. Is I did not have very good leaders. And I felt really frustrated because I loved my job. I loved the company. But there's pretty strong statistics that people join companies and they leave bosses. And the bosses are usually well-meaning. They just have not learned the skills to lead people well. And so being on the receiving end of that, if your leader isn't a strong leader, it's going to be what you talk about at the dinner table at night. It's going to be why you feel anxious on a Sunday night and anticipating work the next day. And if a leader can be really strong, there's just a complete domino ripple effect. And I'm sure all of us have been on the receiving end of poor leadership and on the receiving end of good leadership. And we know the difference that makes. So early in my career, I was just with some leaders that I look back now, and instead of looking back, with any kind of negative feel about them, I actually have some compassion on them because I feel like those skills just weren't taught. So I kind of made it my life's work that how can I help those leaders because they're just as frustrated as their team is, so they can learn those skills. And so that's kind of how my life's work started, and I've just been learning and implementing ever since.
So, no, I appreciate you sharing that. What's a number one skill set that you see among successful leaders?
They have a good relationship with their followers. So I think a lot of people think leadership is about position. Like, because I'm your leader, you should do what I say, not realizing that that does not create a connection, that does not create loyalty. Maybe in the military, or not in the military, we've got to actually be able to have the skills to form a really good relationship with the people that we lead. And when we do, the byproduct of that is retention, engagement, performance, motivation, all the things that a leader probably struggles to get a lot. If you've got a really good relationship with your followers, those are going to be natural byproducts of that. And that would go for any area of life, any relationship in life. But, focusing on that as a part of leadership is huge.
That's interesting. So what if good relationships? So is the opposite true? Bad relationships are the number one, I guess, characteristic of bad leaders. And what are the attributes then of bad relationships? What starts that?
Yeah, and I would say, I never like to let leaders feel bad because, again, I just think the skills just weren't taught. So I'd say more it's like ineffective leaders, but in general, they're people that just kind of focus on the task only, and they don't think about the relationship with the person. That person probably just feels like a cog in a wheel versus, I'm a person first and then I do the task. And granted, people are wired lots of different ways, and a leader has to kind of adjust the way that they lead. But in general, I feel like leaders who also, blame the team for mistakes and then take all the credit, those are going to be attributes of an ineffective leader. I'd say leaders that either in conflict come in really hot and leave kind of a mess, or they avoid conflict altogether. And so a lot is left unsaid. Maybe one more area would be not really clear communication around like a career path and career progression, where people are left wondering, like, what is my career track? What are the performance metrics? How do I qualify for the next position up? Like, if there's any murkiness around that, it's going to make it really hard for the people on a team. So those are a couple of the qualities that I've just seen that make it really hard for a team to be loyal or be influenced by their leader.
That's great. That's great. Can you give us some examples of the types of companies you work with, or maybe even any specific examples?
Yeah, and they would all be fine with me sharing, because this is all about them really winning. All my clients are my heroes because I guide them, but they have to do the hard work. And when they do the hard work and they create their dream team, I'm so excited to see them winning that, I know they wouldn't mind me sharing. So I would say probably my biggest client that I got early on was our US Navy SEALs. So I've worked with them to be able to transition as they're retiring from their military service and going into the civilian sector. It's really different the way that you influence. And I kind of alluded to that before, but it's helping them make that successful transition as leaders. I have also worked with companies like FedEx, SAP, the American Red Cross. Those are some of the bigger ones. But in terms of industry, because leadership principles are timeless and can be applied to any context, I've gotten the opportunity really to work in hundreds of different industries. But for whatever reason, I'd say maybe 75% of my work happens to fall in the architectural, engineering, and construction industries, which is ironic because even us talking today, because you're the other side of the brain with the accounting and consulting and tax and all of that, it's ironic that I would be working with those types of companies where our smarts is reversed. I probably failed all those classes in high school and in college, the ones of the exact clients that I'm working with. So I feel like it's a good exchange of smarts, but I absolutely love working with leaders in all kinds of different industries because the principles are timeless.
So talk a little bit about that. So, I understand, some of the larger companies instituting, at least it seems, when you're a company like FedEx or something like that, or the military, you kind of have a little bit more budget than, let's say, a 15-person architecture firm. So, talk about that 15 or 50-person architecture firm, engineering firm, and what are their struggles on the leadership side, on the transition side, and how are you helping them solve those problems?
Yeah, I would say it doesn't really matter how big or how small, the problems are the same. Because again, these leaders are getting to where they are because they're very good at what they do, but they haven't learned the skills around leadership. And I'd call, management is a science, leadership is an art. So leadership is a little bit more nuancy. It's a little bit sometimes harder for people to measure or make very practical. And I kind of take all the theoretical and I make it super practical. I make it actionable. I give you a process. It's almost like paint by number. And when I was talking with, the architectural firms or the engineering firms that I work with, there's such a beautiful chemistry there. And I always thought, I would never have seen myself in these industries. Why do you think it's a match? And they said, because you make leadership methodical. And I feel like, that's my sweet spot, is being able to take kind of that theoretical and put it into very practical terms. So I could say to somebody, do this in your next meeting in an hour, and you're going to get an immediate shift from the people that you lead. And that's how practical it is. So I would say the same challenges that the big company leaders face. Of course, they're managing a lot more people and there's more complexity, but they're the same general challenges that the smaller companies face. It's just a different scale in terms of all of that.
Can you give some specific examples of a recent architecture engineering firm? And I think you mentioned a couple of things, certainly leadership training and transitions, but and you also mentioned metrics too, like, expectations. I imagine, for probably most 10-person firms, there's not a long-standing SOP and annual performance review metrics. So that makes career path, guidance a little bit more difficult. So
Sure.
There's a lot there. Just pick one and take a stab at it.
So I would have 100 stories to share. I could share one that's really related to kind of the metrics and all of that. So there was an engineer that I worked with a couple years ago, and he was on the chopping block. He had been there 30 years and he was excellent at what he did technically, but people on his team were reporting to HR a lot of different things that were going on that were causing his team to want to move to other teams, or to just he was having a hard time retaining people, basically. So when we started working together, the first thing that we did is we did a leadership 360, because a lot of performance metrics at companies do not have clearly defined leadership traits. Like saying, here are the traits that a good leader has, and here are some questions to ask the people that you work with, so that we can get a good sense of how you're doing leadership wise, not whole company wise, but just leadership wise. So I do what's called 360 assessments, where they get feedback from their superior, their peer, their direct report, and then anybody else they want to include. And you can customize which leadership competencies that you're going to focus on. And so this person went through that. We got their results. And honestly, they were the worst results I've ever seen in my whole career. And I knew they were—
Well, that makes it easy to improve from, right?
Exactly. And they were feeling really discouraged. But what I encouraged them with is, at least we have the data now. Like before, it was vague. You didn't know what was going on. And now we've got this tangible data to work with. And it's only up from here. Like we can fix this really quickly and really easily. So I just gave him over the course. So I say that I know that if a leader takes feedback, is willing to receive it, is willing to put some new stuff into practice, they're going to pretty much overcome that challenge within 6 months. And I have 100% success rate with that. 6 months for somebody that's totally willing and committed, they're not going to have that challenge anymore. So in his case, we just put very specific things into practice. Like we would do like 3 small things over a month span. Once those had turned around and built, we built the next foundation of a couple small things, and, built. And 6 months later, he got Engineer of the Year. So he went from the chopping block to Engineer of the Year. And not only does his team love him, but he actually enjoys leading them. You don't see his frustration anymore. He looks forward to coming to work. He's happy to invest in his team. And when a team is doing really well, it affects the bottom line. So this isn't just touchy-feely stuff that's unnecessary. When a team is really performing at a high level, whatever ceiling you have now, it's going to blow off, because that team now has the capability to go to the next level. So you'll see your bottom line affected. You'll see, retention affected, all of those things. So he was a really shining example of somebody that made a complete turnaround with some good feedback and a willingness to try some things. And I think one theme of his story is you think it's going to be all these major things, but actually it's these little tweaks that make a really big difference. And that's what we focused on.
What were some of those tweaks? So if you find yourself, you know, like, hey, I'm really not enjoying this. I've got a team that I know hates me. What do you do? So here you are, and let's say you don't have an Elise to help you out. What should you do? What do you have any go-to books, or just some general fundamentals and principles that you should remember? Give me 3 things to memorize.
Yeah, well, I can take us a couple different directions depending on the resources. So obviously the ideal would be do an assessment, get some feedback. I can help you go from there. And I can talk about some of those little tweaks. The other would be, if you want to do kind of your own leadership 360, is write down what you think your top 5 strengths as a leader are, and write down what you think your 5 greatest areas for development are as a leader, and just be brutally honest with yourself. Then, to people you know and trust that work really closely with you, have them fill out the same about you and see how closely your lists match up. So in other words, have like 5 people you know really well. Don't tell them what you wrote about yours. Don't let them see each other's. Just ask them for that honest feedback, and then put yours right next to all of theirs and see, are there some themes there between what they're saying are your strengths? Are there some themes there by what they're saying are your needed areas of development? And then how closely is what they say about you to what your own list was? Because that tells us how self-aware we are. You know, if your list is so different than somebody else's, then it shows that, gosh, the way I perceive myself is really different than the way other people perceive me. And that's okay, but that's information you can work with. So that would be one thing. And then just so happened, because I had a film crew here last week who told me to put my favorite leadership books together. So I have it right here. So Wooden on Leadership is a classic, and I have way more, but I narrowed it down. So Wooden on Leadership, excellent. Sports, if you like sports. I don't even like sports, and he's one of my favorite authors on the topic. Another one would be, this is another classic, The Leadership Challenge, and this is just a great classic book. It's a little bit more science-y, like textbook, you know, grad school, but it's got some great principles in there. Another one, I call him like one of the fathers of leadership, is Peter Drucker.
Yeah.
So Drucker on leadership, there's great stuff in here. And then Emotional Intelligence 2.0. So this is a book that I would recommend if you really want to have something practical to apply right away. And the book that I'm writing right now, which will be ready next spring, is going to have a lot of kind of a combination of some of these things in a day-by-day reading. So I know that leaders are really busy, and if there's anything I've learned, it's that they need something right now that they can apply right now with 5 minutes of reading right before a meeting. And so the book that I'm writing is literally 28 days, and it's only 3 pages a day. It is about this size.
I can't wait. I can't wait.
So I'll send you a copy, Brady.
Yeah, please do. Please do.
But this is a great book. It's got case studies. It's got,
of the 4, Elise, that you just showed us, is that the number one that you'd say, if they're going to read one of those 4, that would be it?
Start with this because it's easy and it's only a couple pages a day, and it's going to give you skills to build relationships with those that you lead. And you're going to see magic happen when that starts to happen. And it's these subtle things. So you asked me for examples of kind of, you know, small tweaks that you can make that make a really big difference. So an example would be, this is going to seem so simple. It's going to seem like I could have thought of that, but it's funny. We don't think of it sometimes. So this particular leader, you know, in their office, they have a Slack channel to keep in touch as a team. And he was the decision maker who things had to go through him before a decision could be made. And he was an older gentleman, so that technology and learning it kind of bugged him. And so he wasn't very active on Slack. And so then this is before COVID. So then his team would have to find him in the office to get approval on different things. And a lot of bottlenecking started to happen. Another thing is that when he'd go on a site visit as an engineer and leave the office, he wouldn't tell his team he was leaving, when he would be back, or how he could be reached. So it created an enormous sense of frustration on his team because they didn't know when and how they could get in touch with them. So all we did for 2 weeks is, when you leave the office, put a message on Slack of where you are, when you'll be back, and how to reach you. The other is that at least twice an hour, go on Slack and answer people's questions and learn the technology no matter what, because your team's depending on you for those answers. After 2 weeks of just those two things, his team was like 50% happier. And it seems so small, but it made a huge impact on the daily workflow. So that would be an example of something really small.
Excellent. So Elise, on that note, no, that is really good. So what type of services do you offer? Let's say, hey, we've got a team of, for example, Brain, there's about 50 people of some sort. I would say there's maybe half a dozen leaders or direct report twos at the upper level that trickle down. How would you start a consult there, and how does that go? So that's probably pretty similar size and pretty similar to a lot of your architecture engineering companies. Most people are not 10,000 person firms,
right?
And whatnot. So how does that begin, and how does a consult start, and how does it progress? Would it start out with like a 1 hour consult where you would meet with that group of 6, or maybe the top, like the C-suite, or where does that go?
So typically whoever is kind of the decision maker or is thinking about bringing the training in, I just have a consult with them, and they usually are pretty short because I'll ask the key questions and I can tell pretty quickly, okay, this is what the challenge is. Maybe their challenge is retention. Maybe their challenge is, just a lot of frustration around people not getting their work done, or whatever the issue is. So once we identify the challenge, then I've got, a plethora of different resources. And like I said, I do work with leaders, but I also work with teams who are peer-to-peer working more effectively with each other. So let's just say you wanted your team to work more effectively with each other, and you wanted your leaders to have some tools to lead better. The first training I usually recommend is our core strengths training, which has an assessment with it that measures how people are motivated. Because if I know how somebody's motivated, then it changes how I communicate with them. It changes what their conflict triggers are. It teaches me a lot about conflict and how to navigate it with that person. The assessment also shows us what their strengths are, and the strengths they tend to overdo that cause conflict with other people. So basically, that one training hits on everything a team is going to face. It's going to hit on motivation, communication, conflict, strengths, and weaknesses. And it also shows us the dynamic of that team with each other, because it's very specific to that team. And people walk away feeling like, where was this at the beginning of my career? Because it's kind of a cheat sheet for having influence with anyone. So you can use it with clients, because once you start to learn how people are wired, you can start picking it up in anyone. So that's the favorite training, because it kind of hits on everything.
If you don't understand someone's motivation, you could speak the same language, but not really, right? So.
Yes. So the 3 main motives that the assessment measures is you're motivated either by people, performance, or process. And if I were to just guess at least one of yours, Brady, I would guess you're very performance oriented. Is that right?
That is correct.
Yes or no? I'm going to prove my point right now. You like bulleted communication versus detailed, flowery communication.
Are you reading my Microsoft Teams messages?
So for the sake of your listeners, I'm giving more details because we don't know who's listening to this. But if I was just talking to you, Brady, I would be bulleting everything I'm saying.
You're reading my mail. for sure.
So you can see how that helps, right? If I'm
Yeah.
coming into a meeting with you and I don't know how you're driven, I'm going to be sharing a lot of details, backstory, lots of small talk, and all you're thinking the whole time is get to the
And
point.
my attention span is like shrinking by the minute.
Right? So then I
I'm
can be way
remembering the
more
latest
effective.
cat video I just saw. So
It's just the way it is. So yeah, and if somebody's more process oriented, they're going to need a lot more information. They're going to need time to mull over something before they make a decision. So if I'm working with a client, especially an engineer, and I know they need that, I'm going to send them the proposal ahead of time. I'm going to give them time to think it through so that they can have their questions ready. I'm not going to rush them. I'm going to remind them that I know they want to make the right decision, and I'm happy to answer questions until we feel like we've exhausted all of that and there's no rush.
this is perfect. Elise, how can someone get in touch with you? Can you share with us your contact information?
So it's eliseboggs.com is the easiest way. My site is up. It's under a current renovation, so there'll be some changes coming, but that's the best way. Or you can email direct at eliseboggs.com. And the company's Elise Boggs Consulting. So you've probably heard, 3 times different ways to connect, but yeah, those are the best ways.
Any relation to Wade Boggs?
I wish that would be fun. I mean, who knows? I should do the ancestry.com or something like that, but not that we know of.
No, that's great. Elise, thank you so much for this today. I know you've given me a lot to think about, and I'm sure our audience is going to love it. So thank you so much for today. And you and I will be talking more anyways. I wanted to thank everybody for joining us here today at Brady's Corner. Please make sure to like and subscribe. And until next time, I will talk to you then.